Hey, welcome to Wing Talk. This is Steve, and this week we have our one of our absolute favorite guests, Lee from Painless 360 is back, and a little something happened a few days ago with Argopilot that we're going to absolutely talk about in the second hour. But before we get into all of that, we have one person here today that almost wasn't here, and then all of a sudden, last minute, he's available to talk, and it's great because he knows a lot about Argopilot. And Luke, what's going on with you today? Happy Easter.
Yeah, all's good. In fact, just got out flying with Darren over at the patch. We've had some really good weather here recently. Yeah, all's good.
Did you guys find any Easter eggs while you're out there?
I didn't go looking, but I've certainly been force-fed Easter eggs at home. So
good man.
Okay, hey Darren, I watched you on TV this morning, so it's kind of cool.
On TV?
Yeah, I got Christmas. They had those Google Chrome, whatever. It's basically it's like a Chrome extension you hook up to your television set on HDMI, and yeah, so it's basically like a little computer, and I can pull up YouTube, and I was watching ESP32 and your review on that, and how it's iNav Radar is now ESP32, but we're going to still call it iNav Radar because it's hard enough to get people to know what iNav Radar is, and more or less a new thing.
Yeah. I suppose morning for you. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me, but actually flown with it now as well, which was really interesting, quite cool. So yeah, the firmware update is a little bit different now, so that's why the video. But yeah, and the renaming, the whole way through I called it iNav Radar when I should have been calling it ESP32 Radar.
Yeah. The good thing about it is that it works now with more than just one board, right? It can work with everything up to 1 through 2.
Oh yeah, the different hardware versions. Yeah, because that was a real problem. It's supposed to be up to 2.1, but I didn't actually see the pinouts for 2.1 on the site. But yeah, that's quite a fun thing. Still getting used to how the HUD works, but yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's a little bit more involved to it, but it's not that difficult, and your video made it absolutely easy to follow, so absolutely appreciate it. So great. Yeah. We're going to have a great show today. Hey, Mark, I have a bone to pick with you, and that is, when I first met you, I was a guy who was addicted to those red Racer Star motors, and yeah, I was the guy, yeah. And Mark was like, oh my God, whatever you do, get rid of those things as quickly as possible. So I'm going through right now, and I'm updating all my planes. I have a year to fly every plane I own, get it flying. And so I found one last night, and I fired up the motor, and it had one of those red Racer Star motors on it. And I'm like, oh God, this sounds horrible. I can't, maybe if it flies 300 feet away, I won't hear it anymore. But gosh, I was not a connoisseur of motors until I met you. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's a positive thing.
Now I know the better things in life. I forget the German chocolate. It's these fine Sunny Sky motors and things like that. Today we have with us one of our favorite guests of all time, and just a guy who's just absolutely fascinating to listen to. In fact, right before the show started, he started mentioning something that I want to get right into, which is about reviewers and products that are available. So Lee from Painless 360, welcome back to the show.
Hey Steve, how are you doing? Good, happy Easter.
Happy Easter, Lee. Thank you so much. By the way, there's going to be a hard stop absolutely at 8 o'clock GST. We are going to, we're not going to go on for another half hour after that. And if we do, we will not have Lee with us, unfortunately. So yeah, appreciate you taking. You have not had your Easter dinner yet, so thank you so much. You're a giver. Give, never take. We appreciate that about you.
No, I've been looking forward to speaking to you guys. We had such a good, fun time last time. I think we could have easily gone on for another hour and a half. So it's kind of fun to kind of circle back because, how long ago was that? 4, 5 months ago, maybe a bit more, probably something like that, wasn't it?
Around that, yeah.
We've had a whole new version of iNav and things since then. So yeah, there's an awful lot to talk about. And this year there's definitely different topics in the hobby kind of creeping to the top, because we all have kind of ADHD when it comes to our attention spans as builders in this hobby, and there's always something new and exciting and interesting, and we kind of jump from one thing to the others, and sometimes, you know, you'll jump onto something that you kind of fall in love with and it will become a passion and you'll continue to fly it. Sometimes, you know, then you know 2 weeks later you'll watch another YouTube video, or you'll read another forum post, and there'll be something else that looks really interesting and you go on to that. The fun thing with being a reviewer is that you get sent a lot of this stuff to play with, right? So it's a very privileged situation that I'm in, and you know, and I think it is a privileged situation, because I know lots of people back in the day used to want to start a YouTube, and you have to say it in that way, a slight derogatory way, because everyone thinks that they start a YouTube channel and then the next day the UPS van backs up and unloads 4.5 tons worth of radio control equipment from all the manufacturers, and then, you know, you're off. And it doesn't work like that, right? But for those of us that do get stuff, it's really fun because you get to play with a lot of things. And I did a video that came out yesterday, actually, which I thought was interesting timing for our chat, because it was my top 4 favorite fixed wings to fly. All of them are iNav, surprise, surprise, but it's something that I get asked on a regular basis.
I watched it this morning. It was an excellent video.
Thank you for that. Did you like the idea of actually having sliding scales on the high and low speed and things like that to give you a visual?
Well, can I be honest with you?
Please do, because it was a test. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a test. I couldn't really. There was like icons with the scale, and there was colors. I kind of got it, but I think it would be better if it was just like stars. You know, that's just
okay.
Me.
No, we can do stars. Stars are good. It's just one of those things that because as we're all pilots, we know that some things are better. Some fixed wing models are better at some things than others, right? So some of them are really good on a windy day. Some of them are really good at soaring. Some of them are really good at going like stink. Some of them are really easy to launch. Some of them are very stable. Some of them are highly acrobatic. Some of them will survive crashes really well. Some of them, you know, are made of tissue paper and hope. You know, so the first time anything bad happens, it's all over. And I think that's something that as reviewers, I don't think we do enough of, because we just go, hey, brilliant, did it go in? It's fab, right? And you see it flying and it zooms overhead, and we get the follow cam footage and a bit of FPV footage, and there's some footage in the field. But actually, as a pilot looking at it, what does that really show you? Well, it shows you it flies, but yeah, it's a wing. I seriously hope it should, right? You know, but it's all the extra stuff. It's the bits on the periphery that are different. But it's been an interesting year, and this is what we were talking about before we started recording, because the content creation stuff, for those of us who are in the hobby, who make things like videos and posts and stuff, and you know, I'm sure you guys are in a similar situation, is that it's changed a little bit, because before COVID and before the chip shortage in China that was a result of COVID and a couple of other things, we were very lucky in the hobby in that there was new product coming out all the time. There wasn't a week that didn't go by that there was something new and sexy and exciting. It was a set of goggles or a radio or OpenTX or a plane or a wing or a mod or a God knows what else it was. There was always something to talk about.
And always something on sale too at the same time, right?
Yeah, when the version 2 came out, the version 1, and usually you knew the version 2 was coming because the version 1 dropped like $60, and you were like, oh, why have they got the sale on today? And then the following day, you know, somebody like me or Josh or Stuart or one will be kind of going, oh, announced today this new thing from the Sonic model, and you'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it's kind of not like that now. It's really changed, and that there are lots of the vendors that we used to deal with who used to contact you as a content creator all the time, going, "We'd love to send you one of our models for free if you can make a video." A lot of that stuff has dropped away, and the people who were trying to jump into the back of a lot of the interest that was in the hobby 4 or 5 years ago, you know, with the drone racing explosion that we all had, lots of people decided that it was a good place to make money, invested lots of cash. And now we're very much on the other side of that. I mean, you know, if you look at, I was talking to somebody this week, you know, if you look at Fat Shark, we haven't had a new set of Fat Shark goggles for forever. You know, are we ever gonna see any new Fat Shark goggles? I really don't know, because the last time I looked at the next Fat Shark technology based goggles I thought I was going to see were the ones from HD Zero. And now it looks like they're not going to base them on the Scout, they're going to base them on something else. And people who were the backbone of the hobby, even some of those guys have de-invested from the creation of new products. And a lot of the guys who were just in there as Me Too's have kind of gone away as well. But it's not all bad news, because for me, what it's meant is that the people who are left in the hobby, who are making products, so your Radio Masters, your Armatan, your ZOHDs, your Atomos, you know, the people that we all fly, are in it not because they make loads of money, because let's be honest, there's not enough pilots in the world for them to make lots of money. Most of them that I speak to are in it because they love it and they're passionate about it. And I personally think that's a great situation to be in, because if you wanted to put the amount of R&D in to make a really good radio or a really good set of goggles, you could put it into almost any other product sector and get a much higher return, because there's millions of potential customers in the world. If you make a set of FPV goggles, what is it, $400,000 or something, whatever the latest estimate is worldwide, and most of us have goggles already, right? So the volumes are really small. If you're going to do it, you're going to do it because you want to, and that's meant that, you know, the dynamics and the content that's being created has changed. So you see people like Josh Bardwell being more about news and updates and, you know, kind of the rumor mill and all that stuff, and he's doing an amazing job with that. But for me, it's been great, because rather than me have to come into the office in the morning and sit down and have a little pile of boxes of stuff that I've been sent, and I was always really careful. I always only got stuff in that I was genuinely interested in. I just didn't get stuff in to slag it off and be derogatory. If I didn't like the look of it, I didn't think it was very good, you know what, I didn't get it in because I didn't have time. You know, I've got enough. I've only got a certain amount of time, and I want to do it on stuff I'm interested in. It's cool now not coming in and not having that pile of product, because what I'm being able to do is get much deeper into videos. I was actually at the pub with a friend of mine and his wife. We went for dinner yesterday at one of the places near me, and she asked a really great question. She said, "How, you know, with the chip shortage and stuff, how's your channel gone?" And I went, actually, it's really good, because if somebody sends me a product like a new radio, I can make 6 to 12 videos on that radio of how to set it up, how to do all the things that people get stuck with. So for me, rather than do one unboxing video and show you all the switches and the switch layout and compare it with the old version and talk about what's changed, which still happens, I'd much rather make a video that might only get 1,000 views about the specific issue that the vendor calls me and says, we're getting lots of calls from customers who don't understand this. And I'll go, brilliant, that's great. So I'll make a video. So there isn't lots of people on the planet who have that problem, but if they do, they'll find the video, they'll get fixed, and they'll get back in the air, and they'll have a big grin on their face. So for me, it's very different. It's more about that stuff now than new Fat Shark killers.
Yeah, can I just say this? I'm a guy who's a content consumer, whereas you're the content creator. And the thing that when I was in this phase of buying planes a few years back, what I would do is I would go and I'd look up a plane and and I would see it would, there would be a number of reviews on it. And one of my favorites was Andrew Newton. And I would watch his reviews. And then I would wait, and I go, after a while, I got to know his personality, and I said, I waited till he had a recap video, 6 months later, and then here's the planes I'm going to keep, and here's the planes I'm going to get rid of. And, and what I kind of noticed was there's a lot of videos on the first thing. Here's the unboxing, here's the first flight, and there's nothing else. But what I noticed was there was this one plane in particular last year that showed up, and people couldn't stop talking about it, and I couldn't understand why it was such a great plane. but you actually explained it perfectly. And I'm like, when I watched not one, but like 3 or 4 videos of yours about the Atom RC Dolphin.
Oh, the Dolphin, it's epic.
Yeah. Now I understand why you like it so much. I would not understand it with just one review.
No, and I think that's the issue, is that it's difficult from one review. And again, you have to live with a product for a period of time, and you have to you have to understand its foibles and the stuff it's good at and the stuff it's bad at to be able to give it a balanced review. Having a product for 5 days, right? You know, they'll ship it to you. It arrives on a Monday, and it has to be up that weekend. In my humble opinion, you know, they want me to call these things reviews, and I'm like, they're not reviews. I haven't had it long enough. I have a first impression, I have a first look kind of video, but a review, in my humble opinion, takes 6-8 weeks. You know, I need to have good days with it. I need to have really bad days with it. I need to make the mistakes. You know, there was one where my friend bought the Ranger T1, which is a little twin plane with the wing snap on.
Those are 2 of your planes you like.
Oh man, I love that little thing. It is epic. And it was my friend who got it first. It was one of those fantastic situations, and it happens to all of us. You go to the field and someone else has something cool, and you kind of go, "Oh, what's that?" So and at the end of the day, you think, "Oh, damn, I'm gonna have to order another plane." So you get one, and it's great. But when he was flying his, we found it had a really aggressive tip stall. When you started to slow down, you had that nice wiggle as it was, you know, as the air was separating, it was starting to stall. And then it wasn't much after that it just kind of went, you know what, I'm out. And it did a really nasty tip stall, started to spiral into the ground. What do people call that? The death spiral. No, it's a stall, everybody, and that's what happens. But we had to pull it out. Anyway, long story short, I get mine and I build it. And because I have the DJI HD system in it, my central gravity is about 6 millimeters further forward than it is on his. So we fly mine, and I'm expecting it to be really, you know, to be really ungraceful when I'm getting close to the edge on slower speed. So I start slowing it down to come in, getting ready, you know, coming in really hot for the landing, because I think that's what you're going to do. And I'm slowing down, and this thing doesn't care. It's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, go on, slower. And it floats into the grass. And my mate was looking at me, and he was like, "What have you done?" I have no idea. And when we checked it, the only thing that was different, because I based mine on his throws and his trim positions, so I completely ripped off his setup for an iNav, right? So it wasn't that. It was literally that the central gravity needed to be 6 millimeters forward. You don't find that kind of stuff by having a wing for 5 days. You find that by having a wing for 2 months. So you'll find that the planes that I love will keep reappearing in videos, right? Because they're the ones that I trust and that I love. And then when I go at the field, you know, they don't let me down. You'll find that there are some things like the ZOHD Delta Strike, which are pigs. I'm not a fan at all, and we could go into why, but I'm not good, you know. But that appeared in one video, and I was like, no, there's no point in me talking to people about this plane. And kind of people seeing it on the channel and thinking that that's an endorsement, because actually there's so much more other stuff that's miles more better made out and better thought through. You know, the EDF exhaust wasn't far enough back. There wasn't enough room for electronics. It didn't have enough thrust. It was very, very twitchy. It didn't do slow speeds very well, which made hand launching difficult. It didn't have enough airflow for the EDF, for the intakes. You know, there's a big, massive list, right? But the thing is, I won't make a video, and this is maybe a criticism of me. I won't make a video going, "This is crap and here's why." Loads of other content creators will do that. You know, have the thumbnail where they've got their face in it with the thing going, "You won't believe what they've just done." ... You know, that kind of thumbnail, and you have to watch to find out. That's not my gig. But if you see a plane and you keep seeing it on the channel, it probably means it's one of my stable that I love, because it's, you know, like things like the Dolphin. I've actually ordered, to go back to your point, Steve, I actually ordered a new set of Dolphin foam. Banggood was selling it off like $50 or something like that. My friend pinged me and just went, "Oh, they're just," and I was like, "Brilliant! I'm going to order some," because I love it that much that eventually it is going to have one crash too many, and it's it's going to be unrepairable. And like I've just done with my IR Wing Pro, I'll just lift all the iNav electronics out, move them across, and drop them in the new foam, and carry on having a fantastic time. But the cool thing is, when you build a model the second time, it's always better, because you learned so much the first time of where all your mistakes were, and all those hesitation cuts with the Stanley knife or your X-Acto. So it was fun yesterday to do that little series, little video talking about my favorite 4 planes. But the funny thing is, if you ask me that in 4 weeks, it's going to be a different list. I mean, for you guys, what if you had to pick 4 that you will always take to the and I'm not talking about when you're testing iNav or you're there to impress your friends. It's things that you take that you trust. What would be on your list?
Are you asking that of us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the cool thing is, Steve, is that I find really cool models by asking these questions, because we all live in our own little radio control bubble.
Okay, so I'll go first, and I'll give you guys a chance to think about it. I've been an outspoken fan of the Bixler line, and so the Bixler 2. I've got the Bixler 3 finally dialed in, and that is just a really beautiful plane. And so I was kind of curious about that. I was like, it sounded like the Bixler line was on your list, but not really on your list. There was something about it you didn't like.
It doesn't break down for easy transport is my issue, and it doesn't have enough room for modern electronics. The Hobby King could have done a Bixler 4 and done a couple of tweaks and changes and had a really, but Hobby King just seems to have completely lost the plot.
Huh. Well, I keep on the Bixler 3, I keep the wing together as one piece. And that storage, I don't know if you have a car large enough to fit that, because that's about 6.5 feet. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
there's a reason that AR Wing Pro was designed so the wings come off, and that's because literally it's the only way it'll fit in the boot of my car.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's a difference between gas that's what we're complaining about $5.50 a gallon, and gas that's like $8.50 a gallon.
Oh no, we're paying over £7.50 per gallon here in the UK. So what's that? Probably about $9, something like that.
God. Yeah. So
Steve, it could be worse.
Yeah. Well, we're trying hard to get there. We're trying to catch up. No. So yeah, but I was curious about that, because there was a review I saw of yours in particular. There at one point, you actually talking about buying a plane, because you had that little white Piper Cub from Hobby King. It was the Swiss one.
Oh yeah, the J3.
J3, yes.
And
you were talking about how wonderful it was and how they improved the landing gear and everything. And then at the very end, it was like, and it flies like a Tundra. And I'm like, okay, I already own a Tundra. I don't need this.
It's one of those things. I like. Thing is, I'm with you on the Bixlers. I like the version 2 and the Bixler 1.1. I think were the best 2. I think the 3 is a beautiful plane, but it's a bit big and a bit heavy. I think the 2 was a nice combo of the floatiness and the power. And actually on mine, I've got a pan and tilt that I haven't flown for 2 years, because since I got my new car, it won't fit in the bloody car, because all the electronics are out in the wing, because it's designed for longer range, edge of line of sight. So all the wires, I didn't build it to break down like a fool. What else would be on your list?
Okay, so for me also would be the AR Wing, the AR 900, and there's a plane that I like that just very few of us like, and it doesn't have a lot of following, I would say, and that is the Eachine Blackwing.
Okay.
Have you ever? I think you might have had that before, but you probably had the kit, as I recall, and it was kind of a bit wimpy, and you didn't really particularly like it too much.
Okay, I will revisit that one. I'll have a look at that.
But it's nice to mod that plane out. And then when we got into basically custom foams, but planes I like as well. But I think you pretty much, when I go to the field, I do like when I fly line of sight, I like the Phoenix line of planes. So that Volantix line, so the Volantix Ranger, the Volantix Phoenix.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. Your list of planes did not. They only had one plane, which was the Ranger, that had a traditional tail. So.
Yeah, I'm a fan of stuff that is really easy to transport. That's kind of one of my things. And this is another thing I think that we don't get when we're talking about content creation, is that if you and I have similar requirements, we'll end up probably liking similar stuff.
Right.
But if we don't, then we won't. And unless you know, if you have a match with the content creator that you're watching, it might be that their conclusion is completely erroneous to you. Because as we just, the Bixler, it's a beautiful plane, but I just can't transport the damn thing. I'd have to literally, kind of gaffer tape it onto the roof of the car, which wouldn't be great.
I love it so much I would do that. Speaking of gaffer's tape, Darren, what are your favorite planes?
Well, if I'm going flying, there are only really 3 planes that I take with me every time. That is the Mini AR, the AR Wing, and the Max Frost Riot, which is a line of sight plane. They're the 3 that every time will get taken. So, yeah, I mean, the Mini AR I just really enjoy. And that's gone from being a stock plane to something that's completely different from stock. But both iterations I've actually quite enjoyed. But having said that,
you said the Mini AR Wing. What are the other 2?
The AR Wing and Max Frost Riot, which is a line of sight plane.
Okay. So the traditional AR Wing, not the AR Pro?
Yeah, I don't have an AR Pro. I've just got the original AR Wing.
Okay. And Luke, you're a guy who you're just starting to get back into it right now. You have a whole list of planes you're going to make this summer, right?
Yeah, I've had a bit of a hiatus from uni work, so I haven't really flown very much over the last 4 months or so. And I've done even less FPV, just because it seems impossible to keep FPV planes flying. So yeah, I can't really comment too much on FPV planes. I guess I'm wanting to build an AR Wing Pro that I showed last month, a twin. I'm hoping that that'll be pretty good. In terms of line of sight, I always seem to come back to 3 planes. One is something along the lines of this. So this is a Crack Pitts, a small, this is 600mm wingspan 3D plane for flying line of sight. A Radian, the E-flite Radian, that I always come back to. I've had, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them now. But yeah, again, they always break, so I always push it too far. But that's always a staple of my collection, and I always take it with me. And then some sort of faster plane. At the moment, that seems to be a Striker that I've converted to twin 2207 motors. But it can, just as easily be a flying wing of some description, something around that will do, 120 miles an hour, and it's still easy to fly. So
cool. Mark, can we see you right now?
Yeah, the chat can see me, so that's not a problem. It's just you in Skype right now who cannot see me. But
we'll visualize you. Okay, great. So everyone's hanging on you definitely have a certain taste in planes. So what are your top planes you take with you every time?
Yeah, so planes I take with me every time. It would be the Dart 250G, but currently it still has a defect split camera in the nose, so I cannot fly with that. But usually that would be the plane that's always in my car and ready to use. It's small, it doesn't take a lot of space. I can put it somewhere on the side, and it's just a lot of fun to fly. And another plane that usually always comes with me when I go fly is the AR Pro, of course. When I want to do some, like Lee said it, line of sight edge stuff, or just ripping around, not too aggressively, just having some fun. And yeah, one of my current favorites, and I guess I will see some chat messages from Henrik now in the chat, is the Funjet Ultra.
Oh my gosh.
The Funjet 2 Ultra.
He got to you.
That's currently one of the planes where I put most time in building it, beside the Clouds maybe, especially for getting all the electronics inside with a proper nose. Still some work to do to finish it. It is slower than it's not my high-speed plane, because it is for sure slower than the Alpha Strike, for example. But damn, this plane is so stable. Really, I flew it in like 30 km/h, gusty winds. You did see nothing in the FPV feed. It's like on rails the whole time. And yeah, I need to make a few more flights on it, and I will put a stronger motor, better prop, and some more power in it. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to fly it, and I think this or the AR Pro will both be planes that always come with me, or at least one of both, when I go fly. And then everything else depends on my needs, what I want to do.
So Lee, there's a question I had. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it depends on the mood. I think Mark's I think that's the fantastic summary. It is. That's exactly how it works.
I've got a question for you, and that has to do with these planes in particular. What I've been noticing is these planes that are coming out of Hobby King in particular. They've come out with, like, for example, in the last couple of weeks, they came out with the Coast Guard replica. So it's the C-130 Hercules replica, 4 motors. Now, I'm a huge fan of the United States Coast Guard. Actually, all the Coast Guards. Your Coast Guards are similar to ours. The altruistic organizations, wonderful. I love the plane. I love the look of the plane. But it's $400. And, you know, especially now as we're about to head into a worldwide recession, especially a plane that I'm thinking probably has a bunch of 14 plastic servos in it, with the retractable landing gear and everything else. Are these starting to get, I mean, on one hand, that's cheap when you're looking at spending $5,000 on a plane that's complaining about $400, but that's really, that was a $250 plane not even a year ago.
Yeah, I think what Hobby King were doing, because obviously they've closed the UK warehouse now, so here in the UK the shipping for any of their products has become exorbitant. I'm excited that some of the people that I know are looking to actually start radio controlled retail business. It's here in the UK to address that market that they've left behind. Because I think the vast majority of us UK pilots used to buy most of our lipos. You know, at Hobby King, probably 60% of the stuff they shipped out the door was lipos, because that's where we all went, right? And since it's disappeared, it's like, well, where else do you go? And there were lots of other people coming on. So Hobby King have kind of moved away from that meat and 2 veg stuff, and all the money they made and invested in. They used to make some really fun products, things like the Bixlers and those kind of products, things like the Tundra. You know, there was, it was about once every 6-8 months, wasn't it? Something like that. We'd have something new. And then what seemed to happen, oh my Lord, I think probably when Toby left, or just before Toby left, it was probably three years ago. What they decided they were going to do is they were going to make, because a mold is an expensive thing to actually create, to inject the stuff into the foam, they were going to create models that they could reskin, and you could have different versions of, and the C-130 was one of those. So it's been available in lots of different liveries. Now, for me, you know, again, you're talking about different pilots liking different things. I'm not a fan of the C-130. I think it's a beautiful aircraft, but in terms of a flying model that I can get a lot of excitement out of, I don't fly in places that have flat landing areas. I don't fly in places, you know, that have long, lazy approaches and stuff. You know, some of it is scrabbly, some of it is covered in, you know, manure because it's a farmer's field. You know, that kind of thing isn't going to survive very well for stuff like that. And also it's a transport issue. But what they did is they brought out several different versions, and what they do is they change the paint scheme, essentially. Because when it first came out, I was like, you know what, I would love a spooky version of that. A C-130 gunship with, you know, the whole olive drab green with all, you know, bristling with all that stuff. That would be a fun, interesting one to have, as well as the other versions, because it's such a versatile aircraft. Like you say, it's used in lots of different roles. So it's interesting that they've decided to basically just paint it a different color and sell it as something else that's a little bit different. And I personally feel that's a little bit lazy, because essentially you're still buying the same model. It's probably great for spares and parts and stuff, but it's something they designed 2 odd years ago. It's been kicking around. It's just they slapped a different coloured paint on the thing. I just think that if you look at what Hobby King are doing now, if that's Hobby King's idea of a new product in inverted commas versus what they were doing 4 or 5 years ago, it's diametrically opposite. And if you look now at even people like ZOHD, who used to be the wing designers, who were always coming out with new funky things, it's interesting that was it Mark that talked about the Dart 250G?
Yes.
Yeah. The Dart is one of my favorite planes of all time. The only thing that spoilt it for me is when I was building my first ever one, my wife walked in and looked at it and went, "Oh my God, it looks like a flying sperm." which unfortunately is what it has been known in our house ever since. So be careful letting your wife in when you're building stuff, because these names stick. But in terms of the little wing itself, 650 millimeters, something like that, the wings came off, everything was magnetic, it had room inside for flight controller. An 850 milliamp hour 3S battery would give you 20 minutes of flight time. You could put your FPV gear in it. It was epic. And then they had stuff like that. And then they had the Dart XL. They had the Talons. They had all kinds of different wacky stuff. And every time they brought it out, it really showed some thought about the modern hobby for flight controllers, GPSs, long range radio systems, cameras, GoPros, FPV equipment. It was all really thought out. And it's a shame at the moment that the last 2 that they've brought out haven't been as well thought out, in my humble opinion. They're not as kind of, you open the box and you go, wow, why has no one else done that? That's such a really cool idea. It's very, there's nothing really new that they're doing. So go on, Mark.
Yeah, that was basically what I thought when the AR Pro came out. You open it up and everything is prepared for a lot of possibilities, where you put your VTX receivers, camera, for DJI, for analog, everything works and everything was well thought out. And I think they had the same approach on the older ZOHD models, like the Talon GT and Dart XL. They had nicely designed base. They had different mounts to install different action cameras, at least from what's available at that time. Unfortunately, that was the time when GoPro started to make their cameras bigger, like the 8 and 9 and then the 10 and so on. So they won't fit anymore, unfortunately. But on the other hand, when you look at the Alpha Strike, for example, it's nearly impossible without a lot of cutting and making vent holes and all that stuff to install an HD cam in the Alpha Strike, because if the nose is so far in the front and the distance to the bay is so big that most split cams, the cables are too short. And if you want to make the board in the nose, you have to add air vents, otherwise they would overheat. So there's a lot of potential lost, basically, on these planes.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Mark, because I do feel like I'm almost a lone voice sometimes when I talk about this, because lots of people have different views, and that's absolutely fine. But sometimes it feels like I'm on the minority side. But going back to Steve's point, I go back to Hobby King. I've been talking to Hobby King for 2 years about, why don't you guys build a kick-ass FPV plane? Because you've never really built a plane designed around FPV. You've had ones with canopies that you can put a pan servo on. We've had some Cubs that have optically clear windows, so you can put a camera inside and it looks like you're inside the plane. But with those guys and their expertise, and now Stuart's back there, they do have the ability now. People of like ZOHD have lost the plot a little bit. To really come out with something fantastic with their pedigree. And it's really interesting. They don't understand FPV.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, and in particular, scale versus FPV. How much scale do you actually, how excited do you get about scale?
I don't, is the honest answer.
Darren, Luke, Mark, do you guys get excited about scale?
I would say I like some kind of scale, not these extreme builds like where people go to the flying spot with their big Boeing 747 5-meter wingspan models, but like small foam style scale planes, I really like them, but not really for FPV, because if I fly FPV, I look out of the plane. I don't see it anyway. The only reason for me to get a scale plane, like Lucas there, or like Tundra, Timber, whatever, would be to fly it line of sight, so I can see it. I can see how it looks in the air, how it behaves. But for FPV, I don't really care. For FPV, the plane has to be fully functional. It has to be stable and fly the way I want it to fly.
Yeah, somebody, you gotta say something.
I'm not a big fan of scale. This is actually my most scale plane. You can see it's in tatters, and I don't have it because it's scale plane. It's just because it's fast and it's cheap. I do, however, as Mark alludes to, want to get a scale plane for doing FPV, but I don't actually want a scale plane. I just want any random FPV plane and then mount a scale cockpit on it. It doesn't even have to be, it can be a flying wing with a scale cockpit. Because once you're looking out of it, it doesn't make much difference. But I think that would be a good experience. But no, not really a big fan of scale line of sight. Oh, that's an interesting one.
He's got the now.
So we can probably move on to something that Darren and I were talking about. So I got this. This is actually a He-Wing model. This is an Su-27, I think, a Russian plane. Got this in before the whole current situation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got the Russian version. But this is one of those kind of foamy planes. And this the reason that I got this in is you see them on loads of channels. They're relatively inexpensive. This one is expensive for what it is, and I don't think it's a very good version. So this is one of the few that I got in that was disappointed in. But it'll be super easy for you to kind of make a little cockpit on the front, and for you to add FPV gear. And also, this is something that I wanted because they're not particularly fast. Putting FPV combat gear on it. This would be a fantastic thing to be able to do. Put your FPV on it, put your FPV combat system on it, and to fly around. Because we did some FPV combat stuff last year when I first got the system. And the problem is because we're guys, we're competitive. You can't help it, can you? We've both chosen really fast wings to put our FPV combat system on, right? Trying to spot when somebody's coming at you at 80 miles an hour and you're going, so a combined speed of 160 miles an hour closing with, not, because it doesn't work great with the DJI system right now. With analog FPV, 106, the little pixel that's the guy's plane is past you before you've even got your finger on the trigger. So you need something that's a bit floatier. I actually like the idea of these. I wish there was smaller, lighter scale stuff. So going back to Mark's point about the Dart 250, it would be lovely if we had this kind of cheap and cheerful thing that we could put FPV gear on and have fun. You ain't going to be able to fly it if the wind's over 8 miles an hour, but if you get in a park and you want to have a mess around with your friends and do stuff, I just love the idea of this. If anybody in the chat knows of good versions of this that you can buy,
like the Hobby King Glue and Go, they have a whole line of planes like that.
Yeah, and also the yeah, but again, it's Hobby King. The shipping's like the same cost as the plane now. I mean, I am, joking aside, I am actually getting in a laser engraver. So one of the things in this hobby, right, is you can't help it. You start whittling bits of balsa wood to make pieces, and then somebody gets you into I don't know, maybe something like thermoplastics that you make pieces out of, and then somebody will get you into 3D printing, and you think that's it. Then my next thing is I'm getting a laser engraver that can cut out balsa and carbon fiber and stuff and do engraving. And I'm looking at this and going, okay. If I could probably, the hardest thing is seeing where the central gravity is going to be. And Mark over at eCalc will probably help me figure that out. Marcus over at eCalc will help me figure all that stuff out. It's probably relatively easy to make, because the thing is, the props and stuff on this are so small. This is about as scale as I get Steve. And the only reason I've got it is because I think for FPV combat, it would look cool to shoot, to have two jets flying around it. Because, flat out, this will do 20 miles an hour. But it looks great and it makes a fantastic sound. And actually, because it doesn't weigh anything, when it hits the ground, apart from having a snutty nose, that's about the most damage, and a one little line of hot glue and you're good to go. I'm excited. I'm interested to get more stuff in this, but maybe I'll start designing my own with spaces for FPV stuff.
They have that 3D. No, it's not 3D. It's we had a guy on a couple of years ago who had, you take the Dollar Tree foam and you take the flight test information, their designs, and it's like a laser cutter. It cuts out all the foam so that you can, instead of having to sit there and do it by hand, it does it for you.
My first ever wing that ever flew, because I was doing all the Bixlers and all that stuff, was one of those things, and I spent a happy week with all these cutting mats on top of the dining room table, carefully measuring it out. So I had to, you printed all of the plans out, and then you had to cut them and sellotape them together, and then you were using them to mark it was fantastic. It flew like a dog because it weighed a ton. I didn't put enough motor on it, but when I was so proud it had finished. I mean, is it the Flurkin that Flight Test have done, which is like a little it kind of like
swept wing type thing.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. I must admit, I've been looking for Steve Webb's, is my local model shop that carries that stuff. If I could get hold of a Flurkin, I would love to try. The problem is with Flurkin is an English guy. It sounds like something rude, but I would love to get one to have a go.
Twerking Flurkin, that's right.
A friend of mine, his first plane was the Flight Test Bushwhacker. Not sure if you have seen that. This bush plane style with the big tires, where you even make the tires out of sandwiched foam, and yeah, it was crazy. But later he upgraded a little bit I upgraded it with a more powerful motor, and he also got special bush plane tires, model RC or model plane tires, so they are much more robust. But the funny thing is, if you use that plane with a lightweight battery as far as the front as possible, so it's overall very light, as light as possible, this plane flies absolutely great. It's really like on raids, you can make a full 180-degree turn with a radius of 2 meters or so, and if you down the flaps, you can, by the way, you can basically jog next to the plane. Oh. You can run behind it. It's so slow and so stable. It's really a lot of fun to fly it. Unfortunately, I have it here, so he gave it to me when he moved to another house. And I still have it. I have to fly it, but it's pretty beaten up nowadays because it's a few years old and the Stoller foam doesn't last very long.
So Lee, a question for you. Let's imagine we got you a Ford Expedition, which is one of those huge, I don't know if they have them in the UK. We have a family of like 10 kids, this is what you buy here in the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a huge SUV. Let's imagine we got you one of those, and you could take whatever plane you wanted with you to the field. What would be your kind of no cameras, just you go out and flying? What would you take with you? What would be your ideal day? What ideal planes?
So the bigger planes that I like to fly would be the right-wing Drax. Big fan of the right-wing Drax. They are blooming expensive, but I didn't get it until I was actually the story behind my very first right-wing Drac is kind of a slightly funny one, and I won't go into, but I got involved in a show on TV that was about radio control, and it was one of those things where it was they promised it was all going to be about promoting the hobby and all this stuff because they weren't paying us, right? It was one of those gigs. Wow, you only ever do that once, and you come away and you go, okay, never doing that again. And it was a really shocking experience, and I would never do TV again in that situation, because if they're not paying you, they're just going to basically bend you over.
Was this the Channel 4 thing? Was it the Channel 4 thing, the Spitfire?
I couldn't possibly comment because contractually I can't. But yeah, there's been a few things, but it just, you know, the production teams tend to treat you as an extension of the production team, so you have loads of responsibility but no authority to do anything. So whenever anything goes wrong, you're the guy that they shout at. So in this particular instance, I literally spent 2 weeks charging LiPo batteries and setting up OpenTX radios and getting shouted at by the production team. After the second day, I nearly walked off the set. Everyone, all the other people who was in the pit crew, with the exception of one who is, I won't mention his name, but he is still one of my friends, and he is he has the patience of a saint. The rest of us literally going to punch somebody out. Everybody walked off. The problem is it was 200 miles away from my home. Otherwise, I'd have just gone, you know what, stick this up your backside. I'm out. Because the way it was sold to me to give up 2 weeks to go and do this thing, and what it was very different. So I wasn't in a great place, but I couldn't leave because if I left, it would land the pilots who didn't know OpenTX and didn't have other people to do the LiPo batteries. It would drop them in the poo, right? Because it's kind of like, well, I'm here now. I'm just going to go suck it up. So I was in a very bad place, but I was in one of the accommodation blocks with a pilot that I'd watched at Western Hall. Is that what the show here in the UK? In the Midlands?
Park.
Western Park.
Western Park.
So it was filmed after Western Park, and I'd been watching Western Park, and I'd seen a pilot with a Drac. No, it wasn't Western Park. Beg your pardon. It was the mini air show. But anyway, I'd seen this pilot, and he was flying one of the Dracs, and it looked like something unearthly, and I was a little bit jealous. I thought that's pretty fab. That's pretty fab, and the noise that the Dracs make. Yeah. You know, they're not stealth, right? You know, 30 miles away, there's people looking up from their cup of tea, wondering what the hell that noise is, right? They're screamers. Yeah. And he was flying inverted. It was a fantastic pilot. Anyway, I ended up in the same berth as him, and we both called it a night early. Sorry, this sounds like there's something, you know, dodgy going on, and it was, we were in separate beds and everything, different sides of the thing, and so the lights are off and we're chatting and nattering away, and I was saying I love that plane, you know, that I really like the way you were flying it. Is it fantastic? And he went, oh, I think such and such has got them in stock. So I pulled out my phone and had a look, and it was like, I don't know, £200 or something for the foam bits, whatever it was at the time.
Was it the full-size Drac or the mini Drac?
This was the mini at the time. Okay.
Size is double that, pretty much.
Literally, you know, you could probably get two of them, put handles on, and just jump off a cliff and just float down. But I was so you know, kind of naffed off about everything. I just thought I'm going to give myself something to look forward to. I will order it, and I ordered it, and it came, and then I got into Chris at Right Wing, and I said, look, I'm going to make a build series and stuff. And I said, you know, what's the best motor and prop and servos? Because it literally was a box of foam with carbon rods in and stuff. I don't think it even had servo horns and things. It was the most expensive £200 worth of foam you've ever seen in your life. So I ordered all the rest of it. So that was another $150 for the motor and because it was a special ESC and all this stuff. And it came and it arrived. And I'm sad to say it sat in my garage for about 12 months. Because it was like about £400 by this point, and it was just a load of foam, a box full of electronics, and I'm thinking, there's no way that is going to be, when I put that together, there's no way that's going to be worth, I'm going to have £400 worth of smiles out of that. Oh my God, I was wrong. Wow, I was wrong. Because I put it together, I took it flying, and it flew like nothing I've ever had flown before. I put iNav in it. And I put the DJI HT system in it. This was early one of those, I think, and it was just fantastic. Even when in full manual mode, it was unaffected by the wind. It was just great. So that would be one that I would take if I had a Ford F-150 pickup truck, right, and there was room in the back. The Drac, and I also have the Nano Drac, which is just as epic. I'm on my second body on that one. long story. Because that was a 90. Well, it was about a £200 mistake because I smashed the body, and I also destroyed the HD camera at the front of that one as well. So it was like, oh, fantastic. But when they go in, because they go very quickly, you know, it's one of those where they don't just hit the ground. You have to go and get a spade and dig them out.
That is very true.
Yeah, you know, they kind of just go, oh, that's it. You know, I'm going to see what New Zealand looks like. I'm burying, you know, see ya. And then. Yeah, I know they're just fantastic. I mean, Darren, what do you think of them?
Well, 2 days ago, this one landed inside a concrete shooting range, just about hitting the only bit of grass in there, and took a massive divot out of the grass. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Not even, you got a slight wrinkle there. That's it. And I had to replace one of these bolts. That's the total damage to the mini drac, and it took a huge lump out of the dirt.
Those carbon reinforcements in the nose, along with the foam that it's made out of, particularly if you do what Darren's done and you laminate it or cover it, it does make it into a lethal weapon, you know, and because that thing will do 100+ miles an hour without breaking a sweat, and the noise it does is great. So that would be one. The Bixler, you know, going back to what we were talking about before, the Bixler has iNav in it, running on a Brain FPV flight controller, so it has the Vectron screen display. It has a pan and tilt head tracker set up on it, so you can literally, you know, let iNav take the wheel in essence, and you know, with a horizon mode, and then you can put your head tracker on, and you can have a look around. You can look over the side. It's fantastic. It's those bigger planes that I would probably use more, and also things like the Tundras. I like the Tundras. You know, going back to, I don't fly a lot of scale. The Tundra is, I guess, kind of scale. Also, the Atom RC Killer Whale.
I really like that.
I think that's a really nice model. Atom RC have kind of taken over, in my humble opinion, from what ZOHD were doing 2 years ago. They're bringing out some really interesting stuff. Now, the website, last time I looked, though, only had the Dolphin listed, because they came out with a Mobius, was it? There was a little wing they did, and they did something called the Little Flying Fish, which was a little kind of Park twin.
Yeah, Adam G has a flying fish. He absolutely loves it.
It's fantastic. It's like the ZOHD Drift, you know, the one that has the little carbon spar. It's it's like one of them on steroids. Both of them are fantastic floaty planes, but you don't need a flight controller in them. You don't need a stabilizer, particularly because it's a twin. There's no torque from the motors, because you know, and you just throw it and it just, yeah, okay, see you around. Just heads for the clouds, and it's great. But so I quite like those bigger models that I would kind of travel with, and I would probably do a little bit more line of sight then, because you can do stuff with those bigger models. Because the thing is, you know, as Mark was saying, with the FPV stuff, you're looking out the front of the thing anyway. You can't see what it. So long as it flies well, has good endurance, good manners, good behaviour, you return to home, your GPS is working, your camera's okay. You know, you don't really care what it looks like behind you. Yeah, the only other thing you might worry about is how much noise you're making to scare all the sheep, or let everyone, you know, if you're in a drac 30 miles away, know you're flying. But those were the things I would put in there, brother. It's all the stuff that's currently right at the back of the garage. I was in there today putting the patio furniture out because we've had a beautiful day here today, and it's amazing. My wife wandered in. She hardly ever goes into the garage because, you know, it's a man thing, right? Yeah. So she walked in to help me move the furniture and took one look around and went, "Oh, it's got quite full in here again, hasn't it?" And I was like, "Oh, yes, it has," because it's probably been 3-4 years since I had a real clear out and got rid of all the older stuff. But everywhere you look, you see another plane, and some of them are like, you know, balsa gliders and things like that. You know, because I love that kind of stuff, and there's a new ELRS, a new PWM receiver with a Vario on it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like brilliant. That would be great. You know, and the new Radio Master radio has a headphone jack at the back. I would love to have my little thing in my ear with the Vario letting me know whether I was ascending or descending. Just stick some FPV goggles on, and then just throw it, get to altitude, and then see how long I could stay up. That sounds great. But again, you have to have the room in order to fit those things in. A 2-meter glider.
This is always my favorite question I'd like to ask of you guys. I don't know if I asked this of you before, but you review a lot of planes, and you can't keep them all. So. How do you get rid of these planes? Are your friends sick and tired of all the planes? Like, you give out all the models. That's what happened with Andrew Newton. He was like, even his friends were like, I can't take any more.
My friends don't usually have to buy many fixed wings. They usually, Christmases and birthdays, I'm just like, oh, hallelujah, I can get rid of one. This is another reason why I do like models that don't go together with glue, that are held together with screws. Not just because they are good for transport, but you can actually pack them away again in the box. A glider, when it's in a box, is going to take up, I don't know, kind of 12 inches by 12 inches by 3-4 feet in a box. When it's all put together, it's kind of designed to be the most awkward, bloody thing on the planet until you throw it into the air. And once you've got 3 or 4 of them, then they're always banging and knocking into each other and, damaging the coverings and the hanger rash and all that stuff. So for me, I'm a big fan I love it when a manufacturer thinks of how you can pop the wings off and you can put it back in a box, because you can have 12 wings or 12 models in a big, kind of 6-foot pile of boxes. And that's easy. Whereas trying to find somewhere else. And the other thing, today, I did that thing where I bumped into, we have a patio heater at the back of the garage, one of those kind of big, tall mushroom ones. So it kind of has the propane tank in the bottom, and then like a shaft that goes up into like a big heater thing at the top.
Yeah. The heater.
Yeah, kind of like patio heater. So I bought it, used it once, and then we never used it again. A brilliant investment. But it's because the top of it, it's in a cover. The top of it is where all of the bigger planes get shoved. Right? Because there's just enough room. There's about 18 inches between the top of it and the top of the garage, right? So the thing is, all these planes are, every time there's another one, and it's like, have you guys ever played Kaplunk?
Yeah.
Right. So for those of you that don't know what Kaplunk is, what it is, it's a game where loads of marbles sit on top of lots of little straws, and those straws are crisscrossed, and you pull the straws out one by one, and the idea is that you don't, the little marbles don't drop through, but all of them are so closely connected together that if you pull one straw, the whole thing kind of falls down. Well, this is what these planes were like today, and it was all precariously, everything was balanced on there. And I was rolling up the extension cord, and I bumped into this thing, and it was like having a shower of foam because I was bending down. And my wife kind of shouted, and literally there were planes bouncing off my back. And I just said, and she started picking them up. I went, no, just let me do this, because if I break anything, then it's all my fault, and I can only shout myself. And it took me probably another 15 minutes to put them all back. So you're right. Storage of these things, quads is easy, right? Behind me in these, there's probably 12, 13 quads. You can kind of stack them up. You can hang them on hooks. You can put them in the boot of the car. You can put them in a backpack. Dead easy. You can find a place for a quad. But what I do is I don't like destroying planes and scrapping them. I think that's just a terrible waste. Before COVID, some of my mates are in things like RC clubs. So what I'll do in those instances is I'll donate some of the planes to the club to raffle for charity.
Oh, great.
So that's great, because then everyone's happy. I get rid of some planes, I get a bit more space back. My mate, can be walk into the club and go, right, we're doing a raffle. Some I don't know, St. John's Ambulance or the Coast Guard or whoever can have a couple of bucks, and some of the guys at the club can get a new plane. Everyone's happy. I used to do that a lot. And then the other one, of course, is friends. And so one of my flying buddies, his daughter has shown an interest in radio control.
Which like small planes.
Yeah. But I've got trainers and things in the garage that I don't fly, and I'm never going to fly because I've got other things that are always going to, that those precious hours that we get to fly. I want to fly something I'm excited about. So as soon as he told me that, I was like, brilliant. Do you want to play? And he was like, that would be really good. And so I was like, okay, well, we've got a choice of two. So not only him, but his daughter potentially is going to have a go. And that also means that for him, if the plane gets damaged and she crashes it, because that's what's going to happen, it's a trainer, it doesn't mean that, it's a situation where his family is going to have a problem because we've just spent £110 on a plane. It lasted 15 minutes and it's now smashed to pieces because it was free from Lee. Then there's not as much pressure. And I think in those instances, particularly when you're learning, if you're lucky enough to get a freebie, then the pressure isn't there as well. There isn't that that little voice in the back of your head that says, "Oh, that's a lot of money you've got up there if you get this wrong." If you crash this, you're going to have the walk of shame, and you're going to have to explain to your other half how you've just destroyed £200 worth of equipment. So no, all my friends, absolutely bored of wings. Also, I give them away through things as well, but I'm hoping now that COVID's finished, I can donate some of them again to some of the clubs for things like raffles, because I just think that's a really nice way to do it, and lots of people get benefit that way.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, we are up against the break right now. We have a 180-second break coming up. It's 3 minutes. I've learned last time that 3 minutes is actually not 90 seconds. It makes a difference now. And so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to discuss Autopilot with their iNav conversion. So we'll see you in a few. Hey, welcome back. While on the break, somebody had a question and Lee wants to answer it. So, Lee, what's the question and what's the answer?
So somebody had a really good question, and thank you for asking the questions, because we're just having a lovely chat in here, and I haven't got the questions up because I can only do one thing at once. I'm a guy. I can see things in 3D and read maps, but I can't multitask. But Darren told me there was a really good question, which is, how does the Atom RC Dolphin compare with the Dart? And it's an interesting one. So the Dolphin is an awful lot bigger than the Dart, even things like the Dart XL. So we have to be careful when we talk about the Dart, because there's three versions. The Dart 250, which is the baby lightweight one. Lots of people like it, including people like Mark, obviously, but I think it's a bit too small. It's and lightweight. I prefer the old Dart, the Flying Sperm, as my wife christened it, that is no longer available. There was the Dart XL. I'm assuming we're talking about the Dart, which was the middle one, the kind of 700 millimeter.
Yeah, it was about the sperm.
Right, the sperm. Sorry, see, this is.
It's got a stick.
I'll let my wife know. It's not just me now that calls it that. There's a whole group of people. So the Dolphin is a lot bigger. In terms of flying characteristics, it is very similar. If you like the Dart, you will love the Dolphin. It is impeccably mannered, very graceful, very stable. It is very easy to launch. So, it's got little ribs on the bottom, a nice chuck, and it'll just soar into the air. It's nice and efficient too. You're going to need a much bigger battery than you need in the Dart, but it's not one of those models that, after 5 minutes, it's all over, you have to land. With a big enough battery, you can get 20, 30, 40 minutes of flight time out of it. The big benefit with the Dolphin is because of the larger size, the slightly heavier weight, it'll handle wind better, and there's also much more room inside for modern electronics. So if you want to put your HD system in there, or your iNav, which of course you're going to do, because otherwise why are you listening to this, then there is tons of room. In mine, I have my FPV combat system. I added that in with its own separate 433 radio and everything after the fact when I put the flight controller in. The only reason I could do that, because I didn't plan it from the beginning, is there is so much room inside. It was either do that or let out the battery bay as a room in my house so that somebody could move in and I could make a few bucks. It's literally that big. So if you like the Dart and you want something bigger, the Dolphin actually is something you will love.
And you're saying you have a new plane that's coming that you might even like even more?
Well, so the one that's on its way. So I am about to start a new iNav for Beginners Series. I'm still getting loads of questions from pilots who are coming from multi-rotor into fixed wing, and they look at iNav and the interface, which we're all going to talk about in a minute. The interface looks like Betaflight. So it's Betaflight, right? And I know Betaflight can't be that different, and wings are obviously simpler than multi-rotors. Can't be that hard to set up. The iNav for Beginners Series, the last one that I did, that was designed for beginners, that went through every step in lots of minute detail, was 2020. So, in iNav terms, we're talking 2.6, probably something like that. Pretty much 95% of the stuff that's in that series is still relevant for 4.1 today, because iNav development team do such an amazing job of keeping the things consistent. But I'm getting one of those Mars planes in. So the Mars, it looks like the Dolphin's bigger brother, and I've heard nothing but great reviews about this. So the idea with the Mars is that I can do a Dolphin style series, and then at the end of it, once I've actually built it out with iNav and flown it, then I can do a review of the Mars plane, right? But for the people who have flown it that I know, that I spoke to, I've basically said, if you love the Dolphin, then the Mars is going to be another one that kind of, has a little special place in your heart. I think it's a little bit bigger than the Dolphin. So as I was just joking to Darren while the things were playing, I am going to have to try and hopefully I can make the wings so they come off easily. But it's another one of those planes that just looks spectacular. And, I think the Dolphin does. Things like the Drax do. I love all those kind of, slightly science fiction looking wings, because as they soar over your head, they just look so fab. And I think the Mars will be like that.
Fantastic. Is Atom RC make the Mars, or is that a different manufacturer?
I'm not sure who makes the Mars, actually. I'd have to look that up. It's not here yet. It was supposed to be here by now.
We'll find out more about that.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about this. Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And again, I only get stuff in that I really want to have a look at. But I think the Mars could be one of the next big things. Fingers crossed.
I'll be sure to order it and build it in about 3 years. So fantastic. I'm a little slower in building things than you are.
Yeah, hopefully that answers the question from the person about the Dart and stuff. But yeah, do we want to kind of talk a little bit and circle back to the interface and ArduPilot then? Because we're kind of wandering into that territory, aren't we?
Right. So that's the big topic of today. And before we get into it, I just want to say that I would like to, the one thing that I really, when we started the group in particular, I wanted to focus on something that was not political, because I think a lot of people just get involved in politics and it's always, my tribe. So when we have this conversation, it's very easy for us to get into our tribe, and we're the iNav tribe and there's the ArduPilot tribe, and we're an enthusiast community. So I'm hoping that we just kind of have a good, fair, balanced conversation. With that being said, the people who are involved here, we have the right group of people here today for this conversation. Luke has used ArduPilot professionally. Lee is a fan of ArduPilot. Mark has tried ArduPilot, and he wrote an article about using it a couple years ago. And Darren is just right now putting ArduPilot on his first plane. So is that correct?
Well, I put it on there about 2 years ago. First time today.
Okay.
Maybe that tells you everything you need to know about ArduPilot.
Yeah, it took that long to get it ready.
Did you update, by the way?
Rewind a bit and kind of describe what ArduPilot, where it came from. I believe it came out 2008 timeframe, and so hopefully Luke has some information about this, about how long ArduPilot's been around. And then also, I don't want to get, if we're going to describe something, hopefully we can talk about what it is. Like, we're going to talk about the Pixar Cube. So we'll describe that's the professional version of ArduPilot that's sold. So things like that. We'll get into it. So Luke, when did this ArduPilot first come out? I believe 2008.
I mean, I'm probably not really the right person to ask about this. I've only been using ArduPilot for personally the last 3-4 years, and then professionally the last 2 years. I think it came out around 2008. Yeah, sometime around somewhere around there. I know that it started off with ArduPlane and then ArduCopter. Yeah.
So they've been out a full 10 years before iNav came out. We know as iNav, and what I've seen in particular is that Mark and he said, oh, he's got a.
Yeah, Lee's just put a comment in our Skype chat that I'll put in the YouTube chat with the history of ArduPilot. I'm sure it's a good read.
Okay, good. So, Lee, do you happen to know when ArduPilot came out?
Yeah, it's a very long history compared to iNav. This one is kind of, as a project, is drawing its old age pension and worrying about its prostate. This has been around so much longer, but because of that, the code that's in there has gone through an awful lot more testing. Now, it's very easy as an iNav pilot to discount ArduCopter and ArduPlane, but I think that there's lots of things that you can do with the ArduPilot family that iNav cannot do. And I think that it's one of those things that iNav doesn't do everything, just like Betaflight doesn't do everything, like CleanFlight, like ArduPilot doesn't do everything. So, for example, I'd never put ArduPilot on a quadcopter for racing.
Right.
Although people have, there's something called a Pix Racer, which was a piece of hardware kind of designed for that, but nobody ever did, because you know what? If you're going to race, you're going to Betaflight. So it's horses for courses. It kind of started back in 2009, the original ArduPilot. And then there were hardware that kind of came out that were kind of optimized and designed around the ArduPilot family. ArduPilot, let's define our terms a little bit. ArduPilot is a family of software, right? So it's a group of stuff. So there's ArduCopter, which was originally developed for copters. The clue's in the name. That's the one that there was then wasn't just designed for helicopters, which is what it was originally designed for. It was then enhanced so it could do multi-rotors. There's something called Ardu Plane. You can probably guess what that's designed around. There's one called Ardu Rover, and that does ground-based vehicles, autonomous UAVs. There's one called Ardu Boat. You're getting the idea. There's also one called Ardu Sub. And there's also an antenna tracker part of the project as well. So there's probably about 6 different specific versions of the code for specific platforms. So like iNav is for multi-rotors or fixed wing, with Mission Planner, which is the software that you use with this stuff, Ardu Pilot can be done for anything. And as you install in the firmware, you can decide whether it's going on a copter or multi-rotor, a plane, a sub, a rover, whatever it is. And the really nice thing is that for lots of professional users use Ardu Pilot and trust Ardu Pilot. And the way it works is that the APM, you've probably heard of APM. My videos were 2014. So APM 1 and then APM 2 and APM 2.6s were the ones that everyone was using. Arduino-based flight controllers, 8-bit, criminally underpowered by today's standards, but with an APM2 and Arducopter, you could build a multi-rotor back in 2014 that could do things like clean flight could only dream about. It had autonomous missions. It had GPS return to home. It had the ability to fly in an amazingly buttery smooth way. It had lots of filters inside. So there's a reason that professional pilots use it. Now, from about 2011, which is when APM2 came out, we've ended up with something called the Pixhawk series of flight controllers. So there was the Pixhawk kind of came around 2013-ish. The Pixhawk was a 32-bit version of the flight controller, and then Ardu Pilot continued to support the Pixhawk firmware for quite a long time, and eventually they retired the support for the APM. I think it was 3.2.1 of Ardu Pilot that finally kind of said 8-bit is dead. And then now today, fast forward to today, we have something called the Pixhawk Cube, which is the latest generation of the Pixhawk. It's custom firmware. The Pixhawk Cube Orange is H7, very, very lots of memory. It has the IMUs are vibration isolated. Inside the little cube where all the sensors are, there's a little heater to maintain an even temperature so you don't get temperature drift. It has multiple redundant sensors so that if you have an erroneous reading from one sensor, it'll automatically do a comparison with something else. You can attach multiple GPSs. You're getting the idea. So this is a super duper high-end professional grade system that you can download for free, stick on non-Pixhawk technology now, because they did that 3 or 4 years ago. And the development recently has all been around putting it on what they call, I think, closed architecture. They have a really weird way of describing stuff. But if you have a Matek flight controller that we put, like a Matek 405 wing that we normally put iNav on, that'll also run Ardu Pilot. And now these days it supports things like CRSF, so you can use it with Crossfire, you can use it with the LRS, it'll support OSDs. That only came in just under 2 years ago. Before then, Ardu Pilot and on-screen displays and FPVs were not bedfellows. You could make it work, but you were having to flash separate little boards to try and make it all work. And now it'll also do things and support the DJI HDFPV system. So it's changed dramatically. The interface that you use to set all this magic stuff up, if you're using Arducopter, is something called Mission Planner. Now, Mission Planner was written by a guy called Michael Osborne, very, very talented chap. It looks like it does. When I first started playing with this stuff back in 2012, if you load Mission Planner up today, it looks identical to what it looked like 10 years ago, which if you are an Ardu pilot, then every time Ardu Mission Planner is updated and you go into the new version of Mission Planner, it's like putting on an old pair of comfy slippers. You're like, okay, I know where I am. The interface, though, is dramatically different from what we know from the DIY smaller side of the hobby. So if you use the CleanFlight Betaflight iNav interface, it is completely different, and it's very alien if you've never used it before, but it's very powerful. And that kind of brings us, Steve, I guess, to what's going on now.
Okay, so thank you for that.
I think something that's good to add, because we've already almost confused the two. ArduPilot and Pixhawk are separate things. Pixhawk is to ArduPilot as Maytech is to iNav, but Pixhawks are made only for ArduPilot, you know.
Well, yeah, unless we're talking about PX4 and Q-Ground Control and those things, but yes.
Yes, that's yet another complication on top of it.
So
Although
on that point of the Pixhawk is something that is
it's hardware.
It's hardware, right? But it's commercial hardware. It's basically ArduPilot custom firmware designed for commercial drone industry.
Yes, but there are other versions based on the similar architecture. So there's things like the Durandal from Holybro. Holybro also has something called the Pixhawk 5X. There's lots of other versions that are still Pixhawks that will still run ArduPilot and be supported by ArduPilot. Some of them are slightly cheaper. Some of them have less of the bells and whistles. Some of them have more ports. Some of them have less. So just like in our side of the hobby, it isn't like, you know, you have to have the Pixhawk Cube or you go home. There's an awful lot of choice in the hardware. And Luke, thank you for bringing that up, because it's a completely different set of terminology. I hear a lot of people talking about ArduPilot as the family when they're talking about one of the specific versions. They talk about Pixhawk when they mean ArduPilot. They say PX4 when they talk about Pixhawk.
There's a lot really is just completely separate. It's yeah.
It's a whole nother thing, which we're not going to get into because it will blow everyone's head. But just know that, Pixhawk is the hardware, ArduPilot is the firmware, and Mission Planner is the historic interface that you use to smush those two together and set them up.
The only thing I want to bring this up is that there's professional funding for the developers through the Pixhawk line of developing for the Pixhawk line, for the Cube line in particular, where I believe that U.S. government contracts for military have helped fund the ArduPilot project.
So all of the, without going into detail, there've been a couple of projects that I've been involved in for the US military, and for those projects, they cannot use components manufactured in China for obvious reasons. Okay. There is the cube itself. If you actually look at a Pixhawk cube, there's a carrier board which is about the size of a pack of playing cards, and on that is a cube. Hence the name. The cube is different colors. The orange one is the default one. It originally was black, classic black. You can't go wrong from there. And then they decided that wasn't pretty enough. So now there's an orange one. There's a purple one, which is a half-height version, which doesn't have the vibration isolation. There are lots of different versions, but there's a blue one. The blue one costs 2 or 3 times as much as the orange one, and that's because it's manufactured on the mainland USA, which allows it to be used in military applications.
So we have the background. Mark, is there something you wanted to say before we get into this next? We're going to jump into the current day here in a second.
Nothing special. I think most things were said. Yeah, I think we will go to the configurator thing, and maybe we'll come up with more topics then.
So basically what happened was iNav came out in 2018 timeframe, somewhere around there, 2017. I don't know the exact time. But around 2020 is when our group really started to really kind of start working with the developers, especially during the time of COVID. So there was a lot of development that went on in 2020. And we have some guys here like Darren, who's actually taken, the guy works really hard. And he comes home and he writes code for iNav. So, I mean, talk about someone who has skin in the game about this conversation. So I wanted to phrase that. Mark also has done a lot of work with iNav as far as the development. Can you guys, and maybe Darren, should explain what has happened here with the Code Developer Conference for ArduPilot?
Well, it's something that actually Pavel sort of talked about a few months ago. So it was sort of known it was happening anyway. But what's basically happened is, obviously iNav is open source, and we have two sides again. So we have firmware side, the configurator side. And what the guys at ArduPilot have done is taken the iNav configurator and forked it, which means at that point in time they have an exact copy of the iNav configurator, and then they can change that to work with their firmware. So they can configure their flight controllers through this different configuration interface. So that's basically what's happened.
So why are they doing this?
If I'm perfectly honest, because I think Mission Planner is horrible for someone new to it. I mean, I was joking about the 2 years, but I did actually spend a lot of time trying to get that thing set up. Originally, I have a Skyhunter racing somewhere, which I tried to set up with ArduPilot. I think I followed Lee's video at the time. He was using an F405 wing, but I was using an F405 standard. Again, it was written with specific firmware for that flight controller, but there were just so many things wrong when I actually got it set up. I just ended up giving up on it. And I think that was on version 3 point something. I tried again with that wing, which had version 4.0.8 on it. So at that point in time, the firmware must have been changed. So the issues I had were, followed the wiring diagrams, all the servos were in the wrong places, even following the official diagrams. Also, the arrow pointing forward, stabilization was in the wrong place. Trying to Google how to fix, I mean, obviously the servos you can just resolder, but trying to fix the orientation of a flight controller, Google didn't really show anything up. So I ended up having to go through the through the parameter tree list, trying to find a parameter, but I don't know what it's called, to work out how to reorient the flight controller when I shouldn't have had to do it anyway. It should have been built into that firmware target because it was for that specific board. But yeah, going on to the next time I tried, it did go a lot smoother. So the firmware must have been updated for that target. But there were still things that I thought should have been really simple to do, but were just sort of buried in the interface, in the parameter list.
I think in ArduCopter's or ArduPilot's defense here, what we're looking at is what was originally a relatively proprietary system. They had one or two or three lots of hardware that they had to deal with. The wiring diagrams were dead easy. You know, that the hardware had to comply with a hardware standard in order for the target to work. It was relatively easy and straightforward. That paradigm, oh my gosh, I've busted out the P word on an Easter Sunday. That paradigm was blown apart about 2.5 years ago, where the fresh developers that have come in decided that actually it didn't need to be a Pixhawk anymore. It could be any flight controller, and they created an abstraction layer based, I think it's a Linux abstraction layer that actually runs on the hardware, and then ArduPilot runs on top of that. Now that's
called ChibOS.
Yeah. And that was a game changer, right? That no longer meant that you had to have a Pixhawk of whichever flavor, color, Raspberry Ripple, coconut, whatever, right? You could get a Matek flight controller, you could do it. But I think what happened was the floodgates burst open. Loads of people started developing targets. And I think that it's taken a little bit of time. And I think Darren's got caught in that situation where the documentation and the code weren't in lockstep. Problems were being found. Code was being released before it was being put through all the rigors. So rather than the situation that we had before, ChibOS abstracted the hardware from ArduCopter. Before then, it was easy. You bought the flight controller, you put the software on it, everything was known. There was it was like an Apple, you know, it was like the iOS,
basically.
Plug and play, right? It was really tricky to mess it up. We went from there to the brave world of iNav and everything else, where there's 300,000 different flight controllers and, dozens of different ways of plugging it all together. And it's taken them quite a bit of time to catch up with that. And I think, touch wood, we're almost there, but, that Mission Planner like I said before, it's the same interface that from 10 years ago, but now it's having to deal with all of this complexity that it wasn't designed for back in the day, plus things like VTOL, quad plane, all that technology is in there, but it's kind of hidden away. To configure anything, you have to, it looks like you're entering the matrix. You're in lines of CLI in your parameter lists rather than nice little click on icons and pictures, which is, what new pilots in particular really need.
Yeah. From a new pilot perspective, to me, it's like, obviously it is really, really powerful, but the really simple things are hidden away. That was the issue that I had. And obviously it's something it started off, as you say, for a specific hardware set, had a specific function, and it has just grown, and you have this monster parameter list and not much in front of it. I mean, I was joking on a thread the other day saying it took me 2 days to scroll to the bottom of it, but it is quite a list.
For me, yeah.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Just one sec, Mark. It's if you are used to using it, parameters that you need to change. I was speaking to Luke about it earlier, and he's basically, I'll just do it all in Notepad. It's job done. But if you're new to it, you don't know which parameters that you need to find, and they're not necessarily labeled in a way you'd expect. That was my biggest issue with it. Sorry, Mark.
Yes, so basically for me, the experience was pretty much the same. My first Ardu plane I have set up in 2020, and my first copter, it was in 2019. And for the first Ardu copter, I used these Pixar clones, these Pixar 2.4.8 or whatever the version numbering was. And with that one, because the layout was the same as the original one, I just put Autopilot on there. I saw in the configurator, okay, that's that. Motor 1 goes to that port, motor 2 goes to that port, and so on. Everything was connected, and everything worked out of the box. So the difficult stuff was later to get the copter tuned, but Autopilot has auto-tune for copters. What's pretty neat. That also worked very well. At the end, my biggest issues were my cheap ass 3D XR clone telemetry link system to my laptop and my FlySky radio I used back then. So these two things were actually the stuff that made me trouble. And then in 2020, I built my first plane that was an AR wing, my long-range AR wing with an F405 wing. And in this case, I might have been lucky because the F405 was from the beginning pretty well documented, and it also mostly worked out of box. But then last year, I did put Autopilot on my XUIV clouds with an F765 wing. And there the story was whole different. The orientation of the flight controller was correct, but the UARTs, for example, were completely messed up. So the flight controller is labeled as TXRX1, TXRX2, 3, 4, 5 is skipped, I think, or 5 is only a RX pad and not a TX. Yeah, whatever. And then you look into Autopilot, and Autopilot says serial 1, serial 2, serial 3, but these numbers do not match. You really have to look into the documentation, and check or find the matching table for that, or go on the Maytag website where they say serial this number is UART this number, and then you have to rethink everything and do not change any of the UART assignments in the configurator, and really follow the ports as they are listed based on this table on the Maytag site. This took me, I think, 2 or 3 days until I just got the ESC telemetry, my VTX control, and what was the third thing? There was one more thing I had to connect until everything was working, and that was the most complicated part at this point that catched me on the clouds. And on the AR wing back then in 2020, my biggest concern was basically also UI related because of the mission planner. In INAV, I am used to get all the important settings, everything that's relevant to get the plane flying, to get the plane tuned, is in the GUI. I have a big overview with named variables, with descriptions, what every setting does. So I just go page by page and look what I can change, and then I know, okay, that this setting does this, so I change it if I need it. On Autopilot, I basically I set the launch mode on my Switch. This I can do in the GUI, but what are the launch settings? Where do I change the launch settings? Then I have to look into the documentation. I have to check that one where it's split over it feels like a 50-page text, where one parameter is written there, one is described there, one is described there. You have to read through all of that to know what you can actually change, and then you change it. And then you have some people in the community, you ask questions, and one guy says, yeah, you should set that to this value, and then the next guy comes, this value is better. What do I do now? The description is just missing, and you really have to look everything up for yourself, and you never know if you have missed anything, because you can, as a beginner, you cannot go through the whole parameter tree list one by one and change everything you need. You have to know what you need to change, otherwise you are completely lost.
I think that if you're going for a basic configuration, a basic setup, it's the Mission Planet interface that we've had for donkey's years is okay for the majority of it. I think the issue is that because the interface hasn't kept up with all the extra stuff, it's like everything that gets shoved into the CLI in iNav in Betaflight because they can't fit it anywhere else in the configurator. It all gets stuck into the parameter list, and you're absolutely right. The thing is, once you have set up a dozen models in Ardocopter or Arduplane, it is really easy. I did a Pixhawk 2020 series for Copter. I did a Pixhawk 2020 series for Plane. Both of those are only 3 videos, and I show every single step, and at the end of it, we go and fly it and we tune it and tickety-boo. But there's a reason that I'm using this thing. Going back to the comments about the flight controller, there's a really big reason why I use things like the F405 wing when I did the setup of it. I did one with an omnibus board when Chibios was very first released, right? Because I knew that worked. I did one with the F405 wing board because I knew that worked. I was picking my fights, right? And it does mean that if you're coming in and you're not used to it, it's horrific. Now, at the moment, I've been filming a series on VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing. So this is where you put 4 quadcopter motors around the roots of a wing of a regular plane, and you allow it to take off and land vertically. So you actually have part of the model that behaves as a quadcopter. You have another lot of settings for how the model behaves as a plane. So you have to set both of those up. Then you've got to set all the settings up for how the transitions work from hover to fast forward, then forward flight back to hover. And then also there's loads of other things like weather vaning. So say, for example, you're hovering and the wind is pushing the tail around. How do you handle that? How do you handle a situation where the plane is now slowing down below the point where the wing could potentially stall? You can say to Arduplane, in this case, you can say Arduplane will just start the lift motors so that if my wing does stall, it's not going to fall out the air. It gets really complicated. The issue is that all that stuff, including the 150 parameters for quad plane that's specific to the quad plane setup, in addition to all the settings for the Arduplane and then all the settings for Ardocopter, all have to be set up right for it to work. This is why a lot of the VTOL guys who are building VTOLs these days and using Ardupilot are getting unstuck. Because if this series that I'm filming at the moment, I'm filming it with an incredibly smart guy, a guy called Ben, who runs 3DXR here in the UK. He builds VTOL systems for professional rigs, right? So these are $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, UAVs, right? And he's been incredibly generous with his time. So I've literally got the camera on him, stuck him on my laptop with a screen recorder, stuck a mic on his chest, and said, right, just show me how you set this stuff up. Now, I'm trying to get Ben to go as slow as he possibly can, but it's still like trying to drink water from a fire hose. Because for Ben, who does this all the time, this is really slow and dead obvious. But, you know, after 2 minutes, we've already visited 80 different settings, and he's setting up CAN bus and doing this, that, and the other. And, you know, lots of people have watched it and gone, oh, this is amazing. This is stuff that nobody else is showing. But most people are sat there with their eyes bleeding, just going, I can't keep up. And I absolutely understand that, because when I make my next one, with everything that I've learned from Ben, I'm probably going to have to spend 4 videos just doing the setups in all of the pieces, to make sure that when I go out in, you know, and I flick the switch for it to take off, it doesn't try and kill me.
Yeah. This is, by the way, a very interesting thing, how you explain that, because I have the same problem sometimes when I help people setting up planes. I had a lot of situations where I Skyped with people, then we made some screen share, so remotely I configured iNav. I mean, in theory, if you set up iNav, it's flashing the board, you set up your mixer, you set up your radio, and yeah, maybe and your outputs where everything is connected, and the modes, and that's it. And then you go and fly. And then I start, okay, we could set auto launch settings. Hey, what's your setup? Yeah, these settings will work. And then, okay, this plane is agile. I could make some tweaks on the navigation settings. I could already tweak some pitch to throttle ratio just from my experience. So it comes more and more and more. And then people, the person on the other side, where I just tried to make a basic setup, also gets completely overwhelmed if he or she is a newbie.
Yep.
And that's also why I decided, when I do some things like that and helping people, I go really the basic way. I only the absolute necessary to show them until the people understand that. And then when they have questions, when they want to have things changed, then just explain one thing by one. There's a guy in Canada I have contact for a few weeks now. They are using iNav fixed wings commercially. I cannot talk too much about it, but that's basically the same situation. They wanted to have some geofence feature in iNav, and I programmed that in the programming feature. I basically used every single line of the 32 lines we have and built him this geofence setup. He can adjust in flight where the limits are in 4 steps for altitude and distance. And then after that, I showed him more and more. He showed me how the planes fly, how they perform, what they need. I looked at their logs. Then I said, hey, you can change these navigation settings to have tighter turns in angle mode, for example, or tighter turns in cruise mode, or steeper climbs, or whatever in that manner. And currently I'm showing him how to analyze or how to use black box logs from iNav to plot them on Google Earth and show them to their clients, because they have clients. They want to make reports about the flights they do, and so I also have to bring these people step by step to what they want to go. Darren, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because we've only got about 10 minutes left, it'd probably be a good idea to get Lee's and everyone else's thoughts on the Ardu configurator.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we spoke about the complexity or the problems with the mission planner. So what the iNav, what the autopilot guys came up with is the configurator. I will put it just here on screen again with the on the GitHub. And what they basically did is taking the whole iNav configurator as it was in, I think it was 4.0 from the user interface, put it over and replaced all the underlying code that communicates with the craft with the Mavlink code to communicate with Autopilot. but kept most of the interface. Unfortunately, not the very important things like the OSD setup. That would be really handy. But yeah, that's what they did at this point. We had some discussions on Facebook already about that topic, but Lee, what do you think about this step specifically? That they completely took it over and adapted to autopilot?
I think it's really exciting. I think one of the things that has put a lot of pilots off, and I think we've just aptly demonstrated that in the past 15 minutes, is that somebody coming new into Ardu Pilot who's never played with it before, it's not it's the configuration that's causing the problem. When they actually get it flying, it's a fantastic experience, and it flies, in my humble opinion, it will fly planes and quads better than iNav out of the box. It's quite controversial to say something like that on the iNav Fixed Wing podcast, but the thing that Ardu plane doesn't do is it doesn't understand small wings very well. You have to play for those settings. But if you have a large, complicated, powerful model, Ardu plane is kind of, yeah, okay, I get this. This is what I've been flying for the last 10 years. But having the ability for somebody to access all that technology through an interface that they are more familiar with is just fantastic news. Now, how that's going to shake out to get some of that complexity that we've talked about that's hidden away in the guts exposed in a way that makes it easier, because I think Pareto's law works for this. So I think that 80% of the pilots only need 20% of the settings. So let's hopefully those 20% of the settings that we're all going to need are actually easy to access via this configurator that we all know and love through back from the CleanFlight days. That would just be great. And then if you make one or two builds and you kind of want to put your big boy pants on, then you go and you get your mission planner or your Q ground control out and you're going to get into the nitty gritty. That would be great. But I just love the fact that rather than having to learn mission planner as well as the whole flight control system and how everything goes together, if we can make it easier for them with this, it's just great.
Darren, what do you think?
Oh, I'll leave me till last.
Leave you till last? Okay. All right.
So
Luke.
I just wanted to add something. So Lee just gave a good explanation what he thinks about that. So my personal opinion on that topic is I think the idea is great to make a fresh start, to make a new start on the configurator side. That's long overdue. And but the only thing that for me personally has a little bit of a bitter taste, there's nothing wrong for the community, of course. The users will be happy. But what just has a little bit of bitter taste is that they took it over literally one-to-one. The whole interface, everything that went into the configurator over the last years that was programmed by user feedback, by a lot of programmers, so much stuff. Henrik said a little bit harsh words on the Facebook post. It looks like a rip-off. What I wish would be that they can use the framework, everything is open source, but make an user interface themselves that really represents Ardu Pilot and is not like a complete iNav interface just to attract iNav users to use Ardu Pilot. As I said, it's just my personal opinion on that topic, how they did it, but I still like that they did it and that they do a fresh start on this. So, Luke?
My opinion on it is for Ardu Pilot or something like that, make it obvious they're not trying to steal it. But I really don't think that's what's happening. It's exactly the same as, when any feature is taken from an open source project and added to another one, just this is, a more substantial one. I mean, by the same reckoning, you probably could have said iNav stole from CleanFlight when it, took all of the CleanFlight code base and added on navigation stuff. It took all of iNav configurator and added on the Ardu Pilot commands. Well, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how they'd go about it to, make the developers, properly attributed for it, but I really don't think it's unfair.
All right, Darren.
Yeah, I'm actually in agreement with Luke. Yeah, I mean, as I've spent countless hours writing stuff for Configurator, but when I did this, so it's open source, I know that someone can come and take it and do whatever they want with it. That's really the whole point. I agree with some of what Mark said. At the moment, it appears like they've been pretty lazy, because the colors, the icons, and everything is basically straight from iNav. But by the same token, they're probably concentrating on getting the functionality working first, and then before final release, they can make it look more like ArduPilot. So I really don't have a problem. The biggest, I mean, actually, I saw the demo of the compass calibration thing, and that actually looks really cool. We should maybe copy that back into iNav Configurator, because it works. It looks like it works.
And that's exactly the point. By ArduPilot using the same configurator that iNav is using, they'll find improvements that will go back to iNav. That's the whole point of open source. It'll help everyone.
But I also agree about the OSD thing. I mean, Lee sort of hit on it earlier. But originally, the OSD. I mean, I only saw it from the Matek flight controller side, and originally it was you had to edit all the parameters just to get the OSD displayed where you want it, and then they added UI eventually, but it is still really clunky. And the OSD editor in iNav is really nice, so it's a bit of a shock that they've taken that out. To be honest, it'd have been nice if they'd kept that in, but yeah, as far as
still converting it, only like a few weeks into the project.
No, they were a year in.
Yeah,
they're a year in. Okay,
yeah,
you're not going to see this for another 2 years then.
11 months since the first code changes on GitHub.
Wow.
You say it's going to be 2 years before we see this. I mean, we're already seeing it. You can already use it to configure your ArduPilot plane. Obviously, it's not fully featured, but I think this is already a minimum viable product kind of thing.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, basically, iNav is like Windows, and ArduPilot is like Linux. It is, if you talk to people who know Linux is a far superior operating system than Windows.
After using Windows 11, you don't want to be saying that, because it's an absolute train wreck.
It's like Windows 10. So, yeah, I mean, basically, I know it's interesting this whole thing came up because when we talked to the guys, ArduPilot, I mean, when you talk to them, there's a little bit of like ego that goes along with them. We're a much better operating system. Our firmware is so much superior. We can do so much more. When you see the drone shows, for example, where they spell out names and make horses that fly in the sky, that's all done with ArduPilot, ArduCopter, I believe, right?
Yeah, so and they have things like swarm technology. All that stuff is in the code these days. It's been there for a while. They can do some incredibly clever stuff. But Steve, I think that most of us as pilots are only going to be using that 20%, right? And I think that if that 20% is in the configurator, that will be great. But I'm at the moment looking at it. It's not, is it? I mean, the on-screen display is that bit is the elephant in the room. Could I configure a basic Matek F405 with Ardu plane, stick it in an AR Wing Pro and go and fly it using that configurator? No. I still would use Mission Planner. I love the idea, and I love the fact that all of the questions that I get from pilots who are just struggling to configure it, they've got an option, but I think that I'd agree. I think we're a little bit away from having a configurator that we can use for light builds or simple builds with known hardware.
Yeah, the thing I look at is that our hobby is, unfortunately, when you look at the fixed wing hobby, there's a lot of us in the United States that are in the retirement years, I would say, and these are club field flyers. Well, these people go because that was a huge part of the market. They have a lot of influence when it comes to FAA regulations and things like that. If we don't have people following behind them, we will. We're not going to have. It's going to be a lot harder to fight the FAA in the future. So we need to make sure that we keep having people who are into the hobby. But that being said, I still say that, even with all these changes, the problem is underneath all of this, it's still autopilot. There's still the 150 steps, as Lee said. And I think for a lot of people coming to the hobby, if they come in, especially from Betaflight, coming over to iNav is really fast and easy. It's going to be a big stretch to get them to go from Betaflight to iNav to autopilot. So some people will make the journey, some people won't. But, I'm hoping that, like what Darren said, that this is going to be a two-way street where we can prove iNav because of some of their code writing as well. And I hope the hobby continues to grow because, we're trying to make it better for everybody.
Do you know what the one feature that I would love if the developers over there at Autopilot said, what would you like in this, our version of Configurator? There is one. It's a really easy answer for me, and that one thing is, give me a setup wizard.
For iNav or for
no for Autopilot, and then we can nick it for iNav because actually the setup wizard that we used to have back in the day of the CC3D with OpenPilot, for those of you that are old enough to remember all that, for a new pilot, it literally stepped you through. It was epic, and the chance of you getting to the end and it not working were minuscule if you had followed the steps. I would love that because it would abstract all the complexity, make some clever decisions. Lots of technology. Just ask the user some basic questions that they can understand. Show them pictures they can click on, and then at the end of it, after 20 steps or whatever, it has the attach your props like this, and away you go. That I would be over them. As somebody who spends a long time helping people, I would be doing cartwheels if we could do that.
So just one last. Steve, just one last statement from my side before Lee has to go because he wanted to, or he has to leave now. After the Autopilot devs have taken over the iNav configurator, maybe they could be so nice and do us a favor and port the Autopilot navigation core to iNav, so we could get rid of Horizon Drift. Maybe that would be nice.
Yeah, and we could draw polygons and have them filled in automatically for autonomous flying and all that fantastic stuff those guys do. Yeah, I love that idea.
We have that already. Just use MWP.
So, no, let's not start this. This is where I haven't got time to get into this argument about this. It's we're talking Rolls-Royce Bentley versus some other car. Sure. It is a different thing, but it would be nice to get some of those extra things in as well. But again, like Mark said, this is the fun part of it, isn't it? If someone else is. Sorry, Darren was saying, if somebody goes and develops something with a configurator that's really cool, like the Compass stuff, then that can always come back.
Fantastic. Well, Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. This is just a fantastic talk. Really, I'm glad that this came up and you were able to help out because I think you really did a fantastic job of explaining, what Autopilot's all about. But absolutely enjoyed the conversations about the hobby as well and the different planes and what you like to fly, and gives us an idea of what your motivation is as far as the hobby is concerned. And we'd love to have you back, so don't be a stranger.
No, absolutely. And we didn't get to 2 or 3 of the things that I had on my list. So next time, who knows, maybe we'll get into talk about the VTOL stuff a little bit more.
Sounds great.
Absolutely.
That's all based on Autopilot, right? Because iNav, unfortunately, we ain't there yet with it. So if you want to do VTOL, then you are going to have a very stiff drink and delve into mission. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure as always, and have a fantastic Easter. And I will jump off now and leave you to it. And I look forward to listening to the final podcast when you guys have done everything.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay, bye, Lee.
Take care. Bye, Mark. Bye, Luke. Bye, Darren. Take care, my friend. Stay, Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that would be a good moment to ask the chat what they think about it. I mean, we have some messages, I think. Yeah. So we talked about the configurator now. Anything else at this point?
No, I mean, that was kind of it. And I think he did a pretty good job. I wanted to be fair to Autopilot. It's just the only thing that strikes me is like there's a bit of arrogance that comes along with the Autopilot community when talking about iNav. They kind of look down on us, and then they end up stealing, a lot of the code from iNav. It just struck me as really weird. So I call it Project Milli Vanilli.
It's not really stealing. That's the whole sort of ethos behind open source is you can take other people's code and use it.
And not even just that, but it's not, it's not like when one person that's developing for ArduPilot takes something from iNav that everybody in the ArduPilot community is now agreeing that this is the better way to do it. This is just one person's work. Everyone else in the ArduPilot community may still feel all snobby and that they have the better way of doing it. It's not like a collaborated effort against the people of iNav. It's just... Well,
obviously, we're doing something right. I mean, we're getting the headspace of people who, when people think about automated flight for fixed wings, they come to our direction. And I think it's because we have a really close relationship with the end user base. I mean, we are with them every day. We answer questions. And I just don't know if the Autopilot community is really going to be that enthusiastic to help hold people's hands to 150 steps. So that's about the only thing. I think a lot of people are excited to go over to Autopilot and try it out, but I don't know how many people are going to stick with it.
I think it depends what you're flying at the end of the day. It's, I mean, I can't really comment too much because I've had, basically one battery through that. So I've done a basic auto tune, which I found it to be really too stiff. So I'd put it, basically, you start with level 6 on the auto tune. The instruction manual then says level 7 you should go to only if you're an experienced pilot and you know what you're doing and all this. So I put it on level 7. Luke actually said no, just go straight to level 8. But I put it on 7 just to follow their guidelines to make sure everything was right.
That auto tune, by the way, can also be a big trap I had to experience with my clouds. With iNav, we are used to do full banks, release, full bank, release, for example, or rolls in this case. But for Autopilot, if you do that, the tune will not be well. It will tune especially the D term way too high, and that was the problem I had with the clouds. So I also made a bank right, hold it there, center, bank left, hold it there, center. And after I did that, I had very fast jitter on the wings for the whole remainder of the flight. And I was asking the a small Telegram in a Telegram group, the community guys, and also a few developers are in there, and they said, no, that's the wrong way. You really have to wriggle left and right like crazy. So exactly what we should not do in iNav Autotune needs to be done in Autopilot, and that exactly gave me a proper tune afterwards. So this is also not very well documented. There's a video on YouTube from one of the Autopilot core developers or whatever, who shows it in a line of sight RC game, basically a simulator, where he has this in the loop simulation connected with this simulator, and where he did the autotune exactly this way, but it's not written in the documentation, and that also threw me off a little bit with the clouds when I set that up.
Yeah, but no, I found the return to home obviously worked flawlessly. As far as the acro flying, I think I need to tune it to a faster level. Still, it's just not where it is with iNav. Which, if you stick that in acro on iNav, you can do full rolls, whatever you're capable of doing in manual. But obviously, with a bit of stabilization.
Autopilot also has a rate setting like iNav has that is not tuned automatically, right?
Yeah, you need to up the auto tune level, so I'm going up through those.
what I mean is you have actually rates to set in degrees per second. There's also a setting for that. I didn't know that before I did the tune, so I just put in the same rates as I had on iNav there, and that gave me a proper tune. But these settings for degrees per second are still there also in autopilot. But usually they are always on default, and I think that's also the reason why any plane you set up with autopilot flies the same at the end, and it feels exactly the same. You don't feel the plane anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually a little bit disappointed in that I was expecting it to be silky smooth, but I did have a bit of sort of pitch jitter. But again, it could be because it's an S800, so there is that. I could put it on iNav or put it in manual and see what happens there. But yeah, when everyone talks about it, about how smooth and well behaved it is, I didn't quite get that with that plane. Again, it could be the tuning, it could be my inexperience, but the actual flying, no problem at all. I took it out for a little a very short line of sight maiden, and it behaved itself very well.
When we first started talking about this subject, we had Archangel on really to try to talk about autopilot because he knew it really well. And he would even mention, like, I'm flying my plane 5 miles away and all of a sudden it happens and I'm losing my plane, it's going down. So it's not like, even though it has so much more hours with flight, especially with professional flight, there's still problems you can have with a plane with autopilot.
You can have problems with anything, though. It's nothing is complete 100% foolproof. I noticed that when people are talking about our C-Link stuff, it's like a lot of arguments you see about maybe FreeSky receivers is they're crap or whatever. But in our flying club, there's a guy with Jetty. He had a brand new receiver. After the one test flight, it died. So even like the best can still have problems, and at the end of the day, we're dealing with human written code and mass produced electronics. It's
right.
I also had a chat with a friend from mine yesterday or 2 days before, who crashed his, I think it was an AR Pro or AR 900. And he showed me the DVR of the flight, of the crash itself, and it clearly looked like a phase safe situation or micro phase safe, because he was flying very low, like 1 or 2 meters off the ground, like 150 meters away, and on the last stick input movement he made, the plane slowly rolled in one direction and crashed into the ground, and he uses Crossfire. So even Crossfire can phase safe at 150 meters if you are 2 meters off the ground. So sometimes you're just not in there. Bad antenna orientation, some interference, or just an obstacle in between in a very bad position. So yeah.
Well, I guess the big question is still trying to figure out why they did this. Obviously, they're trying to get more users to try out autopilot, and it's interesting. I mean, it's a compliment to us. Invitation is the most sincere form of flattery. But this is more an invitation. This is outright, like, take this, plug it in, and use it. Take the configurator and bring it over to what we're doing. But yeah, I mean, hopefully they get out of what, it sounds like. I didn't really know that autopilot was not as fully baked when it came to the flight controller side, using the Maytech flight controllers and things like that. So
if you use the Pixhawk Cube line, that's what it's really been designed around, and that's almost exclusively what I've used with it, and it really does remove a lot of the problems. I was talking to Darren today while we were at the field, and Darren was having loads of problems that just aren't a thing when you use the Cube series. It's definitely a different way of doing it, but of course a lot more expensive, a lot more professional, a lot bigger.
This might be the whole thing, because there's a lot of people who use the Cube series professionally, and they're like, you know, they look at iNav and they say, "Oh God, this is like a toy. You know, this is not anything close to what we have."
And as much as I use iNav, and I use iNav on some reasonably big planes, it definitely does have, you know, more that kind of feel. You know, the Maytech boards, they're great quality and stuff, but they're not the same kind of great quality that you get from a Pixel Cube. You know, the flight controller isn't made out of CNC'd aluminium. You know, it's it might be good quality, but it's not good quality.
Yeah,
you know?
you get what you pay for at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. One question I have is, in the Pixar Cube, do they have separate gyros, or are the gyros built into the Pixar Cube?
It has 3 individual gyros, but they're built in, and they're as Lee was saying, they're vibration isolated in a foam casing within the cube. You know, the cube is like a bit that the flight controllers for the Cube series, they have a cube that then goes on a carrier board. So the cube is actually the brain, and then the carrier board is what has all the ports. So the cube is vibration isolated and heated section that has the gyros, the barometer, etc.
The reason I bring that up is because we're starting to, like, in the next month or so, we're going to start talking about using our black box data, our gyros, for doing flight stabilization and video. And what I've noticed is, like, there are some cameras like the RenCam 5 that has gyros built in, but they're not very good. So it's not like you get great quality video stabilization from it. And I'm kind of curious to thinking, like, my thinking is, when you go down the road here a bit, are we going to start seeing separate gyros? Gyros you actually buy separately and plug into flight controllers, because you want to get just even better stabilization out of your plane and better readings for your footage.
As far as I'm aware, carry on, Mark.
Yeah, I think the problem is not the gyros itself in these cameras, like the Thumb or the RunCam 5. I think they all use standard gyros like these ICM or MPU 6000, because they are the cheapest ones. I think the problem is the hardware around it, like the power source or the power regulators they use that induce electrical noise. Also the mounting position, the housing of the camera that transfers high frequency noise, or even the software filtering they do in the back to get cleaner gyro data, because you have to be very careful on these gyro loggings. How much filtering you apply. The more filtering you apply, the more latency you have, and the harder it gets to stabilize very small motion. So I think at the end it's a hardware design and software issue if the gyros are really bad. I mean, the RunCam Thumb, for example, it's basically useless. I think that's, in my opinion, the most useless camera released for years right now. The resolution is too bad, the quality is too bad, and the gyro is nearly unusable.
Which RunCam is this?
The RunCam Thumb, these very small, that looks like the Insta360 Peanut.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, those are small sensors that they have in these cameras, and you can put 1 million pixels in there if you want to. It's not going to improve things all that much. You know, it's basically, there's 3 things when it comes to these cameras. It's the lens, it's the actual sensor, and then it's actually the processing unit, part of the video processing unit, part of the CPU. So,
yeah. But at the end, it's a $50 camera, so there's nothing much to expect.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing that right now, and that I'm looking forward to the video thing that we're going to come out with, because they're trying to come out with better, you know, action cameras. But I think at some point in the future you're going to see interchangeable lenses on action cameras, and you will be spending as much on the lenses as you are on the action cameras.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, guys, I think this has been a great show today. God, Lee here was fantastic. Definitely covered a lot. So thank everyone for sticking in with us. This is Wing Talk After Hours. We're done at on the hour. We spent a few minutes talking afterwards. So I always enjoy having you.